we are doing these webinars. This is the third in the series to support the managers and executives in your exercise of leadership during these challenging times. And it seems like they keep getting more challenging every day. So I appreciate the work that you're doing on behalf of all the people of California, because counties serve everybody. And we hope that the things that we're offering through these webinars help you help others in your community. So today, we're going to be talking about how to have more effective meetings. And again, for those who have joined us, after we started, I'm Bill Shai, the Dean of the Institute, and have been facilitating meetings and seminars for, I don't know, 40 some years. And joining me today is one of our other Institute faculty, Angela Antenore. Hello, Angela.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for making time to be here today, and we're looking forward to engaging you. I've been part of the CSEC Institute faculty since its inception, and I do a lot of work with counties and cities across the state, and have found that a lot of people, while they're engaged in a lot of virtual meetings, they think they could be a lot better. So one of our goals today is to try to help you have some agility and flexibility and adaptability in how you can use virtual tools to help you be more effective.
So that's a perfect segue into what we're going to be talking about today is how to use virtual meetings. And we hope that you'll walk away with three things that we're sharing with you today. One is how to use it and what is the technology. We're using Zoom today, but it's going to be very similar technology with the other platforms for doing virtual meeting. How to use some of the tools and how to use them effectively and when to use them, and then how to apply these tips and others to facilitate meetings. And some of these will be reminders of things you should be doing for any meeting, but particularly for virtual meetings. And all of us have been participating in virtual meetings. And as we look forward in trends, I don't think virtual meetings are going to go away even once we start doing our in-person meetings again. And so learning how to use some of these things will help all of us more effectively serve the people we serve.
So to get us started, we were wanting to ask you to think currently about where you find yourself in this question of how do you rate your effectiveness at leading virtual meetings? So we're going to post a poll, which is one of the strategies that you can use when you're doing this work, and many of you have participated in polls before. We'll give you about 30, 45 seconds to answer where you find yourself on that scale.
Well, a few of us are sort of where I was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, or four weeks ago, and the one.
And some of what we'll talk about today is both the access to and the people's ability to engage and be able to use the technology. And the other is the actual software or ability to use the tools that the software provides. So there's a lot of different realities that we're going to discuss to help you navigate all that. I think that's probably about good enough on the poll.
Looks like most of us are right in the middle.
There you go. All right, so we're going to take a look at that as we go throughout the session today and see what we might be able to do to up you a notch. And for the people who think they're already a 5, I'm going to encourage you to please type into chat and engage with us in ways to help others understand how you got there. One of the things that I like to do in these kinds of sessions is to be able to do what I call is a double debrief, give you an example of a model that you might want to also use yourselves. And while this looks like really mundane, like you've seen it before, this idea of having some ideas for ground rules and being present is really an important thing to discuss with people. I am no longer assuming that people understand what we mean when we say these things. So when we talk about removing distractions, Bill mentioned, please mute yourselves when you enter a room. If you're having a team meeting, being able to understand, like if there's 8 or 10 people that you're, gathering together, being able to understand that maybe their kid's going to walk in or there's a dog or their neighbor's doing something, and be willing to adapt and flex with that, but ask people to be prepared if they say yes, they can come to a meeting, that they know what your expectations are for that. Actively participating, part of that means that you need to focus, but also it means as the leader of the meeting, we want to give you multiple ways to actually engage people. So today what we'll be modeling for you are the various things like polls and breakouts, but also the annotation tools, which I have found that a lot of people don't necessarily have familiarity and access to. Centering yourself, making sure that if you've been in back-to-back Zoom meetings that you're not zoomed out, and that you can make sure you get up and move around, or if you have a standing raising desk, you can do what you need to do, like I said, to take care of yourself. And then look for application. One of the things we're going to be talking about today is why are you even having the meeting to begin with? So we'll do that double level of looking at meetings themselves and figuring out what do you actually need a meeting, and then what kind of meeting is going to be most effective for you to meet your goals. So the next thing that we will, Bill, I think you need to advance for me. The next thing that we wanted to ask you to do is actually practice using some of the higher level tools. A lot of people, I don't assume that people know what these buttons are. So really briefly, I'm going to ask you to click your chat button, which is at the bottom of the screen, and you'll notice that on probably the side of your screen, the right side of your screen, your chat box will come up. Many people know that. But what a lot of people are not familiar with is the participants button. And if you click on that, you can see everybody that's on your meeting, and it actually pulls up some tools at the bottom with a yes, no, go slower, go faster, and then some other reactions. So what I'd like to ask all of you to do right now, so you can practice this and feel comfortable with it, is click on the participants button, and then go ahead and let us know, click yes or no, if you have actually led and facilitated a virtual meeting using any of the tools. So the question, yes or no, is have you led or facilitated a meeting using any of the tools like voting, polling, breakout rooms, those kinds of things. While people are doing this, I want to also acknowledge that with these courses and with counties and people in different parts of the state, sometimes accessing the technology itself is a problem. So some of you may be on telephone only and you can't see the screen. So my hint for you on that, our hint for you, is make sure you know ahead of time if you have participants who will not be able to see your screen. And for those of you who can't see the screen right now, we are recording this, and we have made the slides available for you so that you can practice with some of your teams when you're back in the your work setting. So looking at the different votes, it looks like it's kind of a mix. Some people haven't voted yet, so that's okay. Just wanted you to be able to see where those tools are. So I'm going to ask you to click again on, it looks like 22 of you say no, you haven't used the tools before, so this is a nice opportunity for you to have done that. If you click on your vote again, it should take it down. And that's a nice little strategy as well. Thank you for advancing to this slide, so you can see that you can also raise your hand. And I'm finding that in some of the meetings that we're leading, raising your hand, lowering your hand is a really useful thing to know if people want to actually say something, especially if you have a team meeting with, say, a dozen or so people, something like that.
Well, Angela, I liked your technique too about using it for clapping.
Oh yeah, so if you click on raise and lower your hand, and one thing you should know is as the facilitator, you don't have that option. So on my screen, I can't model it for you, but you can, and you can see from this slide here. So if you click off and on your hand, I've been in several meetings where people are applauding at the end or applauding about a particular decision, and it can be really fun. So thanks for the reminder, Bill. So the next thing that we wanted to try to do is think about, and we're going to put you into a breakout session, is to ask you to discuss, and we'll give you about 10 minutes or so in this, and there'll be maybe 7 or so of you in a room, is something that you've done or observed which helped make a virtual meeting more effective for you. So discuss that in your breakout, and then when we close the breakout, we'd like to have a recorder from your session type in 2 or 3 ideas into chat to everyone. And this reminds me of a really important thing. I know you've heard these stories before, but you have an everyone button, and then you have buttons that can type in answers to just, or type into chat to just individual people, like an instant message. I've been involved with doing some mediations and cleanups with people thinking they were sending a message to one person and it actually got broadcast to everyone. So I just did it this afternoon. I meant to send a message to one person and I ended up sending it to 3, and it was fine. It wasn't anything problematic, but it's really easy to miss that step. So I caution you to use it carefully. Another logistical thing, just really quickly before we put you into the breakout group, is that if you type into chat when you're in a breakout group, it stays for the people that are in your breakout group. So that's why we're suggesting that you select a recorder who's willing to type into chat once we close the breakout room so that it can be seen by the larger group.
And Angela, this is where we want to hear from those people who rated themselves really high. What are some of the things that you've done that made you feel like you've really got a handle on this, so that the rest of us get some of those tips too? So if you don't see some things popping up there, feel free to add to those, because we'll do the transcript from our chat, and we'll post that on the website as well, so that you don't have to write down all these ideas. We'll do it for you, and we'll have this great compendium of tips for effective virtual meetings.
All right, so we'll go ahead and launch the breakout. For those of you who have not been in a breakout before, you will notice at the top right-hand portion of your screen in your breakout who's in your breakout, and you will also be able to see the time remaining in the breakout. And our CSAC team will go ahead and set the timer so that it'll alert you when there's a minute left. So let's go ahead and go for it.
So a couple of things are popping up. You can see it in chat, where your camera is, and we'll look at that too. And where do you look? Smiling helps. Using Google Meet to edit and create docs. And by the way, I just, in chat, you'll notice there's a PDF. It's the last page of the handout we sent you, but Angela will be using it in a minute. So it's easy to share documents. That's our checklist for virtual meetings. So that's a really important tool to use chat with. We find it helpful if you know you're going to have documents that you're going to use to put them on your desktop, so you're not trying to search through files and find things. If you're going to use a PowerPoint, or if you're going to use a video, or in this case the checklist, just have it all on your desktop, and that way it's easy to find. Breakout Room 8 have found that breakout rooms have been very successful for our respective counties. Some counties use it to talk to clients, public defender. Others use it to engage staff. We think it's important to set agendas to keep people focused. Yeah, we're going to look at some techniques, and one that is important for any meeting, whether it's virtual, in person, any meeting, is the use of an agenda. And a lot of times we just don't do that, and our meetings flounder. Assign a facilitator, especially when you have mixed groups where people are working from different places. A facilitator or a moderator. Somebody said have materials on desktop. Virtual backgrounds, we're going to talk about that in a minute. There's pluses and minuses to using virtual backgrounds. Debbie Cooper said, giving people time to 5 seconds to reply, because sometimes technology takes a little longer. Checking in with participants to gauge how they're feeling. Yeah, all of these are ideas and techniques to make meetings more effective. Let's see, what else? The ability for facilitator to control others' mics, cameras, and even eject them from a meeting if necessary. I mean, a lot of the things we're talking about here are for virtual team meetings where you're meeting with your colleagues. But many of these will also be just as important for public meetings or other opportunities where you're going to get a lot of extra people participating in those, and to think about some of those and how they play out. Clean up the office area behind you. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about distractions. That's a good one. Knowing how to help or deal with if your meeting gets Zoom bombed. And Angela, you were going to comment about Zoom bombing at meetings.
There have been a lot of different times where, especially with public meetings that I've seen, where a participant or someone that calls in might just start ranting or even cussing or calling people out or doing things that are inappropriate or have invaded the meeting. I was involved with something where I thought I was participating in one public meeting but the prior meeting hadn't been turned off yet. So I entered into a planning department meeting when I was there for a different department that was supposed to have started, right then. So being able to have a moderator or someone who knows how to use these tools so that they can be invited to leave or cut off is particularly helpful. So you can mute and you can shut off someone's camera when you're facilitating, and having your moderator know how to do that is essential.
Yeah, there's a couple other comments here. When you're sharing your desktop, pay attention to what's on there. So, I think, Angela, you wrote that. You may not want everyone to see other documents on your desktop, or there's been several interesting stories about people having tabs open that were embarrassing, but people saw on the desktop. So pay attention to those kinds of things. Katie and Marin said breakout groups, screen share agenda. That's a handy thing to be able to do, is just screen share your agenda, take meeting notes real time, and having multiple facilitators like we're doing here now, where I'm able to read some of these while Angela's talking, and Angela's able to read some of these while I'm talking, and we have Liz and Chastity kind of paying attention to other questions that we may want to address in the at the end of the seminar. One of the things that came up is a challenge. There is some challenges of using technology, and that's because not everybody has the same technology available. So part of planning for your virtual meeting is thinking about who's going to be accessing what technology. And as Angela said a couple times, how can I help people who are only maybe accessing this on telephone, people who don't have video access. So especially with your teams, is knowing how people will attend the meeting in advance. Know if you're going to have people attending only by phone, so you can accommodate that, or if there are people who don't have a video camera, so that you know what's going on. I recommend in virtual teams that people always have their video camera on. It's similar to an in-person meeting. You don't duck under the table when you don't want somebody to see you. So it's important, and part of that is engaging everyone is to make sure people have if they have the camera out, available and on. Sending out materials in advance so people know what's they're going to be looking at. They can review some of that, particularly if they don't have access to be able to see, for example, the agenda that you have in your screen share. When people join by phone, all you see is a phone number. So knowing who is what phone number is really helpful, so you can call them by name rather than call them by phone number. And it's also a way to ensure that only the people who should be in the meeting are in the meeting. So if somebody's going to connect by phone, make sure they let you know what their phone number is. Sometimes people are going to do both. They're going to connect by their phone camera, but they don't have a camera on their computer, so they're going to call in by, or they don't have a microphone on their computer, so they'll call in by a phone. As several people mentioned, doing frequent check-ins, calling people by name is very helpful to keep them engaged, particularly if they're not, if they don't have a video camera, and if you want to be sure they're engaged. If you're sharing visuals and not everyone has a screen they can see, is describe what's on the screen. So for those of you who may not see the slide, one, you have the slide already in your handout, but also I'm just identifying some of the things that are showing up in the visuals. One final note is on breakouts, and breakouts are very effective, but if people are both calling in on a telephone and are using their video camera from a different source, they're going to end up in different breakout rooms. And so you'll see them in one breakout room and hear them in a different breakout room. So again, be aware of that. And if that's the case, you may not want to use breakout rooms because it will be confusing to people. I suspect in some of the breakout rooms we just did, some of you had a visual of somebody and others of you had the audio of that person. So it's something to be aware of and to be thinking about. So should you hold a virtual meeting? And I guess it begins with the question of, do you need to have a meeting at all? And I think this is a question you always should ask yourself, is Sometimes we schedule meetings and we have recurring meetings that we really don't need to have. And when you start adding up the amount of time of people sitting in meetings, it's worth asking the question, is a meeting the most efficient and effective way to achieve your purpose or whatever your outcomes are? Because there's many different options to consider. I mean, one is what we're doing right now, some kind of video conferencing on Zoom or Microsoft Team or something like that. Sometimes though, a conference call is sufficient. And Angela said earlier, sometimes we get zoomed out, and just doing a conference call may be a more effective way of holding that conversation. Maybe it's just picking up the phone and calling somebody and doesn't involve other people. Maybe it's sending an email rather than having a meeting at all, or a text or a message of some kind. Maybe it needs to be a face-to-face meeting or a one-on-one meeting on Zoom. You don't need to involve all the other people. I mean, all of these are things to consider before scheduling a meeting. Maybe you just don't need to have a meeting. Maybe it could be a shared document. I think once we're past the crisis that we're in and we're back into the offices together, whenever that is, we will be going back to, for the most part, in-person meetings. But I think one of the things we're learning is that virtual meetings are a handy way to get people together quickly for quick decisions or brainstorming that you can schedule literally for the next hour, doesn't involve anybody moving or traveling, and can be done in short periods of time, 30 minutes, maybe 40 minutes. So I think this is going to be a tool that's with us, but use it judiciously. Use it carefully. And the checklist is a way to help you start preparing for that. And that, Angela, would be a cue for you.
Okay. So one of the things that I was taking some notes too. Bill was talking about the meetings. Much of the time, Outlook biases us to a 60-minute meeting. And one of the hints that I've had recently is to not have a 60-minute Zoom meeting back to back with other 60-minute Zoom meetings. And you might recognize or remember that in the beginning of the pandemic, when Zoom was allowing people to access meetings for free, they limited them to 40 minutes. And there's a reason for that. I think there's neuroscience behind how we're getting exhausted trying to do meetings like this. And also, this provides us an opportunity to think about, as the meeting host, what needs to happen before these meetings start. You need to know who your participants are and what technology they have, and if they have access to the technology during the time that the meeting's been scheduled. I've had a couple of folks tell me that, well, we always have our meeting on Monday to prepare for the board meeting on Tuesday, and it's always been at a particular time. Well, if people don't have access to the technology to engage in that, you may need to adapt. So adapting and pivoting in this reality is another thing that I think you might be able to walk away from this conversation thinking about, do I really need it to be an hour? Can it be 30 minutes? And then also, based on the checklist, what are your goals for the meeting? And then what kind of meeting, like Bill said. Using a moderator and having support. If you have a team meeting and you're trying to track what's going on either in chat or with people's technology, everyone is waiting for those 5-10 minutes, and it's wasted time. I read a stat toward the beginning, it was at the beginning of April, that productivity was down 40% in meetings because there's always that hiccup trying to get everybody to be able to use the technology. So one of the other things is to practice. And so part of what we're going to do this afternoon is give you a couple minutes to play around more with some of the additional tools that are available. And so with that, when you look at your meeting checklist, you can see there's the structure itself, what kind of meeting, for how long, who needs to be there, what technology do they have, but also accountability. What are the roles that you want people to serve? When I was certified in virtual facilitation a few years ago, I was working with a technology company as a consultant. We talked about having the people who were leading the meeting not accountable for the record keeping and all those other kinds of things that happen behind the scenes, and everybody knew who was accountable. So the moderator, the recorder, whatever you want to call it, but teaming it, like Bill mentioned earlier, is really important. And then the communication around this is especially helpful. So you'll notice on the meeting checklist, one of the things we didn't put on there is knowing what technology your folks have access to, but to be thinking about that. So the next slide actually is an opportunity for us to be able to let you think about and practice some of the tools. We put these in an order of what we thought you might experience as being sort of the entry level tools and then getting more sophisticated. We already practiced with you how to raise hands. We actually practiced with you how to vote. And with the raise hands, I know the applaud thing is kind of fun. What we'd like to do now is give you a chance to know about the various annotation tools that are available. And in doing so, what you need to do is go into, for some of you, it's going to be at the top of your screen. For others of you, it's going to be at the bottom of your screen. It'll say view options. And what we want to do, and somehow I'm not able to get my screen to share. Here we go. What we want to be able to do is let you draw into the whiteboard here. Want to make sure that you have, if you go up to the top, for me it's the top of the screen, and you hit annotation tools, you get a toolbar. And across that toolbar, you'll see you have a text tool, a drawing tool, a stamp, a spotlight, an eraser, various things that you can use. The arrow, when you see spotlight, if you click on that, you can also find an arrow tool. And you can see my name is in pink with my arrow tool now. And you can play around here with. So I'd like you all to grab an arrow. So let's be really specific. Yeah, it's fun to play around on the whiteboard here, right? But go ahead and go to either, it's going to say spotlight or it'll say arrow at the top. Make sure if you click spotlight, you'll find the arrow and then your name will show up. And so I see Jim and various people clicking around here, which is really pretty cool. That's wonderful. And there's arrows, there's the text tool. Someone go ahead and grab that text tool and type something in. There's stars, hearts, check marks, arrows. So great, hello, whoever wrote that. One of the things you'll notice is that most of those annotation tools allow you to be anonymous. When you use the text tool, you have to click out. It's like kind of like hitting enter. In order for those words to show up. So some of you may have typed something, but you don't see it showing up to everybody yet. It's because you need to go ahead and click out from that. I would like to make sure that you know how to find your name tool. So if you go to that arrow, and I'm going to actually switch screens here and ask you to do this. I'm going to stop share and I'm going to share now what we've got here. On this particular screen, I'd like you to go back up to your annotation tool and I'd like you to put a stamp. I don't care if it's a heart, a star, a check mark, whatever it needs to be, but go ahead and put a stamp next to something that you find particularly interesting or useful when you're participating in a virtual meeting. So there we go. Everybody's got their tools. And so you can see that, and Bill will talk in a couple minutes about the different tools that you can use for different parts of your meetings and for different purposes in your meetings. So this is great. Also in your annotation tool, if you want to, you can change the color of your tool. And so if you want to be, you know, gold, blue, green, red, whatever colors, you can go ahead and shift your tools around. And I recommend you do that ahead of time. And your team can have some fun with tailoring their presentation as well. So with that, one of the last things about these various tools, I'm going to ask, I'm going to see if we can clear the screen here. Maybe Elizabeth, can you help? Oh, perfect. I'm going to ask you to vote one more time and let me know what tool was new to you today. Put a stamp next to what tool was new to you today. We'll give it about 5 or 10 more seconds. Okay, great. I was thinking that the annotation tools might have some traction in that, and then also the whiteboard. So when you're sharing your screen, one of the things that you can share that's built into Zoom and many of the other software platforms is a whiteboard. And so you can have whatever you want on that whiteboard. You can leave it blank, or you can type in something for people to respond to if you're not using PowerPoint. You heard me ask Elizabeth to clear the screen for us, because if I go on to the next slide without clearing the screen, all that input will show up on the slide. And so it's interesting. I wish I could do it here. There we go. So see, all your data is actually showing up on this screen. So the hint is, when you're back doing these kinds of activities, to go ahead and clear screen. So with that,
Well,
you can, yeah.
Angela, I think another helpful tool is the text tool, because this is a great way to do brainstorming. Is if you look at your annotation, you can see text, and if you click on that, you can, so example, we could be doing brainstorming and asking everybody just to throw out some ideas, and you start seeing a whole bunch of pieces coming up. So I think that's another helpful tool when you're using whiteboard.
Right, and I saw only a few people be able to use their names too. And I think when you're doing a roll call in a meeting or something like that, you may want on a whiteboard or a PowerPoint slide to be able to have people use their names. So whichever one you did not use yet, either the text tool or the arrow tool, go ahead and experiment with that so that you can play on this whiteboard. So yeah, you can draw and you can, great. Love the whiteboard, awesome.
So there was a question from Vincent: does the text actually change the slide, or is the text only an overlap over the slide? In this case, it's an overlap over the slide. You can, if you're the meeting host, you can choose to allow other people to control your screen. So if we were working on a PowerPoint, for example, together, you could set that option so that everybody could work on that PowerPoint together. But that's not the case with this particular tool here.
So there's also a tool on the annotation bar when you're the facilitator or co-host that allows you to save what's ever on the screen. So it's almost like taking a screenshot of whatever is here. So it's part of the record keeping or the accountability for your meeting. And so with brainstorming and those kinds of things, it could be particularly helpful for you to have a record of that.
Right, and you could see where combining some of these tools becomes really helpful. You could do a brainstorm and have everybody type in their ideas, then look for what are similar ones and combine, and then tell everybody they get 3 stars and have them vote on their 3 favorite ideas that are there. So very similar to what we might do in an in-person meeting, but just do it electronically, and then take a picture of it, and that can be part of your meeting record. You can attach it to the minutes, and everybody sees the work that was done. So combining some of these things becomes effective ways to use the whiteboard and get everybody engaged in brainstorming or problem solving.
Bill, I received some personal texts that not everybody had been able to find the annotation tool yet, or the annotation toolbar yet. So I just want to make sure that this is your time to make a mess. I mean, when in planning this, I said this is going to be wild, it's going to be a little messy, and that's okay, because to be able to practice now is exactly what we were hoping for. What I will offer to you is, if you weren't able to do that today and you want to touch base with me afterwards, I'm happy to try to walk you through, and I can actually turn my camera around. I don't want to make everybody seasick, and show you how to do that. So you can contact me after the session today, and I'm happy to walk you through.
Right, and again, we're showing you the specific tools for Zoom, but all these platforms have very similar tools, and in fact, attached to your handout were some more specific instructions. But just understanding that these tools exist, if you're using WebEx or somebody else's platform, is just looking for where are those tools and figuring out how to use those.
All right. So
Uh,
I am going to clear all these drawings unless you really want them. Here we go. Say bye-bye. All right.
Bye. So one last thing, Angela, before we leave this, Jesse asked, any tips on how to orient people in using the whiteboard? I tried it once and it was a little messy, lots of overlapping writing when many people wrote all at the same time.
One of the things that, it's a really good question. When I had just said this gets messy, right? You saw us use two different approaches to how to get people's input. You can do it on a PowerPoint slide where people could actually type in or put their stamp next to a pre-existing list. If you're wanting people to actually type in to a whiteboard, I tell them to claim some real estate, and then if they realize that someone's there, which you don't really see until you click out of that text that you type in, then we can debrief it. We just talk it through and say, oh, it looks like there's two that are overlapping, and just speak to it and make sure they both get seen. And then as you record the screen, you can make sure that they can even type it into chat if they want as an extra option. But if they want to stay anonymous, then it's making sure you call out that some things are overlapping, and it just gets messy.
Yeah. Debbie suggested not having numbered lines already there. So, people can just grab one of their lines. And again, this is a good tool when you're with your team, and the more you use it, the more comfortable the team members will get about using this. It's, as you can see here, we have, I think we have 54, 55 people here. It gets really messy with that number of people, but when you're 8 or 10 people, it's much more effective in using things like Debbie's suggestion of numbering, or people know that I always use the upper right corner, somebody else always uses the left corner for their ideas. Are a variety of ways that that might be helpful. So, and continue typing. Oh, I didn't see or hear how to bring up the whiteboard. So that's under screen share. So that's that green box that's on the bottom. And you won't be able to see it because you're not the host. But when you're the host, when you click on that green screen share, one of the options for screen shares is the whiteboard. So just click on that, and that's how you get to it.
What it does too, when you click, like for Bill and I and Elizabeth and folks at CSAC, we're all co-hosts. When you click on that, you see all the open documents that you have that you might want to click on, which is part of, back toward the beginning, we were talking about making sure whatever's on your backdrop is clean. Like if you don't want people to see what internet browsers you've got open and what's going on, make sure that the last things you've brought up on your screen are the documents you want to show. Like I made sure I had the PowerPoint and the virtual meeting checklist. And so what shows up when you hit click share screen are the options for those things that are open on your desktop.
One other tip that somebody shared with me, and I found it very helpful, especially if it's a critical meeting and you're the host and you want to make sure everything works well, is restart your computer just before the meeting begins. That way, whatever junk is out there, whatever is open that you didn't realize was open, is reset and cleaned up. And also, if you happen to have updates waiting, because that will freeze your screen sometimes, those will get taken care of so that everything is clean for your meeting. So that's another strategy that I think is really helpful.
Someone said, Jesse said he or she thought that the host can have settings to allow participants to share the screen. You can do that. Remember, depending on the meeting, like if it's your team meeting, then sure, people can share the screen. But if you've got a public meeting or a meeting with a lot of participants, that can get really chaotic really fast. It's like,
Yeah.
who's the meeting facilitator, who's the meeting host? You want to make sure you're controlling for that, and that'll help you not get Zoom bombed or
Yeah.
invaded, as they say. And they do, Christine offered that many of these tools look different on different devices. So yes, and that's where the toolbars, like your annotation toolbar and some of the other things, shift around. Also, depending on what view you have. I was just in a meeting several days ago. There were about 22 people involved, and several of the people didn't know how to change the view of how they could see the people. So I want to offer you that opportunity as well, that if you go up to the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you can have, you'll see it says speaker view. And then next to that are some 4 boxes, there are 4 corners of a box that look like this. That puts you into full screen. The speaker view will either have it just be the person speaking, like right now you see Bill, or you'll have a gallery view where you'll see the different people, and whoever is speaking, there's a yellow box that shows up around their while they're speaking. So being agile and making sure that you can see who you want to see. And some of the neuroscience that's out there now is talking about how part of why we get zoomed out and get so tired is if we see ourselves. And so you can actually block your view, especially if you're in a smaller meeting. You can just be looking at the other people and not be focused on, you know, is my hair right, or what's going on in the background at my house, and, you know, that kind of thing. So recommend that you experiment with what viewing viewing format that is going to work for you. So
And practice with it too. Uh, Try Zoom just on yourself, and practice with some of the tools so that you're comfortable. See what it's going to look like, so you can see what people are going to see when they see you. I mean, all these are things to think about before the meeting. And just like any meeting, these are things that you ought to be thinking about. Certainly the detailed agenda. There's never a successful meeting that doesn't have a detailed agenda that identifies what's the purpose of the meeting, what are the anticipated actions for each agenda item, who's responsible for that agenda item, and approximately how long do you want to spend on that item? Because that gives you some tools then to manage the meeting as it goes along. It also signals to everybody in the group, what is the expectation for this? Is it information sharing? Is it coming up with a recommendation for a decision maker? Is it a brainstorm? What is the expected action you want out of that? Because that puts the frame around what people are going to be thinking about and how they might approach that, and how they might prepare for that. And certainly if there's somebody responsible that they see their name is there and they're prepared ahead of time for that element of the meeting. Angela talked about the idea of having a moderator. Even for a team meeting, it's helpful to have somebody else do the moderating, who, if you're going to use breakout rooms, just like Liz is doing with us today, she's already got that set up. If we're going to do polls, she has those set up. So it's helpful to have the moderator, so that if you're the person in charge, if you're the leader of the meeting, you're not trying to worry about trying to find that button. You can just facilitate the meeting. Remember, we said earlier, send the invites, agenda, what kind of meeting it's going to be, and what the expectations are. So if your expectation is that everybody is on video, that you want to see everybody, let them know so that they can make those kind of arrangements, or let you know that they're not going to be able to be available by video, that they're going to call in because they're driving somewhere, so you know what is going to happen. Sending the materials out in advance helps people get prepared. Of course, that's true for every meeting. As never surprise people at a meeting and start talking about something that nobody's prepared for. It's the death of a meeting, because when we're not prepared, we tend to talk forever about something. We never get around to making a decision or bringing an end to it. Confirm that everybody's going to have access to technology. Have a backup. Our first webinar we did 2 weeks ago started at 3 o'clock. At 6 minutes to 3, the power went out here at my house and I lost internet. And fortunately had the backup to be able to call in, but PG&E got the power back on 1 minute before the webinar started, so I was able to get back online. But be prepared for that, because especially if people are still working at home, there's going to be limits. Things are going to happen. Wi-Fi is going to go out. Somebody's sucking broadband for a video they're downloading. And so be patient with that and know that that's going to be part of your planning beforehand. And of
Bill,
course,
if I could
oh, yeah.
offer really quickly, I've heard numerous stories of in a household, you might have two parents and a couple kids who are all trying to use the broadband at the same time, which is another thing that can be difficult. Or you've got kids on screen, screen time, gaming and things, which sucks a lot of broadband. And so helping your teams when you're actually doing team meetings navigate the timing of your meetings with what's going on realistically in their households is really helpful.
That's a really good point. Thanks, Ann. A couple things on administration. Having some ground rules for the meeting is really helpful about how do people contribute? How are you going to manage over contributors, somebody who's over dominating? What's the expectation for using cameras or not using cameras? How people give feedback? How you want to handle questions? Have some of those ground rules so the team knows how we're going to communicate. Now, for ongoing teams, this is probably early up setting those, but after you do some of those team meetings for a while, those will become routine, just like a in-person routine team meeting. People begin to know what the culture is and know what's expected and how to interact with each other. But especially when you're using new technology like this, or you're having new people join the team that haven't been part of it in the past, is being clear about how people are going to contribute really helps people feel engaged and not ignored as part of the meeting, and be thinking about those kinds of things. If somebody's going to be the note taker, make sure they know that role and what is expected. And again, people who are going to be expected to be presenters or talk about an issue, have them prepared in advance and give them a time frame. I want you to take 3 minutes to give an overview of this. For example, for our webinar today, I'll hold up the screen. Angela and I went through in great detail over each element of our webinar today and how many minutes we wanted to devote to that and which of us were going to speak to that. And I think effective meetings are orchestrated in that way as well. And so it's not just ongoing conversation that seems never ending. And again, as a number of you said, is if you're going to allow people to screen share or work on each other's pieces, arrange that in advance and become comfortable in how you're going to use that. One of the other things to think about is looking your best virtually. Angela already talked about the speaker gallery view, but there's a couple other things to be thinking about. Know how to mute and unmute yourself so that if there is distracting noises going on, or if you have to cough or you drop something, click on that mute and unmute is really helpful. You can set it up to be Alt-A or Alt-M, I think it is. When you're on mute, you can just push the space bar to unmute yourself if you just want to say one thing and then go back onto mute. So there's a couple, in Zoom, there's a couple techniques like that. All the other applications have similar techniques, but it helps so that you're not hearing screaming in the background or Angela, what was it? The trash truck came by for you just before the session started. Locate your thumbnails closest to the camera. So I don't know if you realize this, but you can move, if you have thumbnails, if you're on the speaker view, you can move the thumbnails so they're right below the camera so that if you're looking at other people, it doesn't look like you're not being distracted looking off to the side. That's one option. And for some people, just turning yourself off so you're not distracted by yourself, as Angela said, is really helpful. If you exit full screen, you'll be able to have the chat screen always up on the right side. And so you can always see what people are saying when they're monitoring. If you're at full screen, the chat screen is not up there or it appears somewhere else. So it's another strategy to think about. And then finally have what we call standards of professionalism. Look, think about what would you be doing if this was a face-to-face meeting? What would you be wearing? How would you be presenting yourself? And treat it the same way. If this is a professional meeting, and if it was at the office, you'd have a nice shirt on, a sports jacket on, or something like that, or a jacket of some sort. Then do the same thing for the virtual meeting. Don't show up, with a torn T-shirt, because it lowers the professionalism of the meeting. Be aware of what's in your background and the distractions that are there. A lot of us use virtual backgrounds. I recommend the virtual backgrounds that are not moving. Having palm trees swaying in the background behind you is clever, but it's really distracting for all the other people who have to watch that. So a still background, a background that isn't full of a bunch of other things. Some people have backgrounds that have all sorts of stuff behind them, and I find what I end up doing, probably you too, is I'm busy looking at what's in their background, and I've forgotten what they're talking about or even what they're saying. So think about what's in your background. If you're in an office or other people are going to be potentially coming in, can you close the door or put a note up that you're leading a meeting and don't want to have the distractions, so that people are not distracted by your distractions, or having the cat jump in your lap, or the dog run by, or the kids come by. All of those are things to be thinking about, as well as lighting. Make sure that people can see your face. If you have a bright background or things behind you, then your face is going to be dark, and that's, again, distracting. So all of those are things to look your best. You can always view yourself before you start the meeting to see what are other people going to see, because what they see does communicate. And those of you who've taken our classes and presentations or other things know that much of the communication is the nonverbal, what people see, the nonverbal actions, where people are looking when they talk. All of those communicate things as part of the conversation. So be aware of that. Look at the camera when you're talking to people. Not off onto the side, so that people feel like you're talking to them. What would you do if you were in person? Always a question to ask.
A couple comments I've been tracking in the chat, thank you, Bill, are, there was the joke of, are shorts okay? And, early on, people realized that if you stand up wrong, and like if you're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance, I saw this in a public meeting, you stand up and it was a total crotch shot. And it was just like everybody's, zipper lines were being shown. Wear what you are comfortable with. I think there's an ability for many of us to be a bit more casual now. And that's okay, but remember the spotlight's on. If you're leading a meeting and you're a leader in your organization, you might not want a t-shirt from, Tahiti to be what you're wearing because of the image that it implies. The one thing I'll say about backgrounds that have been really helpful for people, and Michael reminded that the bandwidth issue with a ceiling fan or other things going on in the background can really use up a lot of fuel. But a lot of people are working like in their bedrooms and their kitchens. And so having a background that maybe is a library or an office, or it doesn't matter what it is, that is just neutral. And so that professional piece is helpful. I was recently on a call and the person had their trip to the Serengeti in Africa behind them. And she was white skinned. And she was so dark, and it was so dark, we couldn't see her at all. So when Bill was talking about seeing, being able to see you is really important. That brings up another thing. A lot of the cameras on these computers are biased toward people whose skin looks like mine. And a lot of times we need to support some of our staff to make sure that the lighting is okay so that they can be seen. If someone has a lot of melanin in their skin, they're not necessarily in certain lighting contexts with low quality cameras, it's not comfortable. And so providing those resources to people who might need them is a really great way to make sure they can fully engage and that they can be seen. This particular tool, oh, and another question that we had was about the facilitator agenda. We can share with you a mock-up of what a facilitator agenda looks like. That's an example of something like, I don't care what meeting you're doing, whether it's virtual or
Right.
otherwise, having the times allocated approximately and having people know ahead of time what the purpose of the meeting is, and being able to do handoffs like we're trying to model for you and we've done in the other two sessions here, is super useful and important. That's an effective meeting. And that whole idea of a meeting, calculator and a meeting clock, if you have an hour-long meeting and you're spending 10 minutes dealing with technology, that's 10 minutes times everybody that's on the meeting. You lose an hour of productivity if it's 6 people. I mean, it's pretty amazing how expensive our lack of efficiency becomes if we don't practice these things. On the other hand, I said early on, and Bill, I'll get with you just one second. I said early on, practicing and having the opportunity to make a mistake is really helpful, because you're modeling for people that you're trying to do your best, but if they don't know, you're not punishing them for that, or they don't feel shamed or uncertain. And that idea of knowing ahead of time what you're going to do and how you're going to use it, this is your opportunity to practice. And don't assume that people know how to use these tools, just like we didn't for you today. Bill.
So I was going to piggyback on your mentioning of putting times on your agenda, because it's also a way to help you facilitate the meeting, because you can bring to attention of the group, we spent the 20 minutes that we had hoped on this. Are we someplace where we can make a decision? Do we need to spend more time on this? Is there more data that we need to collect? And asking those kinds of questions rather than just letting it go on and on and on to no end. So all of these that Angela and I have been suggesting are techniques we all know, but they work even better in a virtual meeting to help make that meeting as productive as possible, and every minute that you're spending in that as productive as possible. And that people feel engaged and wanting to contribute, and not sitting there and listening on and getting distracted and starting to look at their phones and do something else.
Perfect transition to this slide. Thank
Yeah.
you, Bill. I've used this. It works when you have about a dozen or less, dozen or fewer people. Putting people's names here and letting them know, and maybe screen sharing this when you're having a conversation about or a discussion about a particular item, that you are going to call on people. Unlike with other meetings and sometimes with courses that get taught, we don't necessarily want to put pressure on people to be called upon. We want them to self-nominate that they want to contribute. In a virtual meeting, a really good strategy is to let people know up front, we're going to be calling on everybody. Like that's part of what keeps people engaged. So I've used this in several different ways. I'll say, let's start at 6 o'clock and we'll go around the table with, what your thoughts are on this topic. I've done, and then they go around. And then another time I might say, let's start at 9 o'clock, or I might say, let's go counterclockwise. So you're kind of making people pay attention, but also they know who else is in the meeting, which is also helpful. This also helps me if I want to type something into just one person into chat. It reminds me that I don't want it to go to everyone. I want it to go to just, that one person and whatnot. Some of the better practices in virtual meetings is that, and it sounds wild, but it really works, and we've been trying to model it for you today, is that every 3 to 5 minutes, you're actually asking people to do something. 5 to 7 is the outstretched time. And so if you really want to engage folks, there's lots of different tools out there. This is just a simple one I created in a PowerPoint slide, and you can use it a lot of different ways.
It just occurred to me, Angela, you could also use this by just having it up right now, and asking each person to put something next to their name, their answer to a question. And so that's another way to help organize the screen. I think that was a question somebody asked earlier. So
it's claiming the real estate.
Exactly.
That's exactly.
Yeah, or you could use it as a start of a meeting. How's everybody feeling? Pick one word about how you're feeling, and everybody type it in by their name. I see somebody just put an arrow there. So this is again an example so that people can see how people are feeling, and claiming real estate, and also making sure that every single person, as Angela was saying, is engaged and is expected to be a contributor to the conversation. A couple items again on keeping in mind during the meeting. Keep again, staying on track. These are the things that should be in any meeting, keeping discussion focused on whatever the topic is, supporting the ground rules, checking in with the group on timing. Especially on a virtual meeting though, if you're the leader or the facilitator, is listening actively and paying attention to who's participating and not. It's easier to do in an in-person meeting. And an online meeting, a virtual meeting, you've got to really be paying attention, maybe using some kind of tally or some way to know that there are some people that haven't participated and that you're able to call on them and ask them how they feel about something. Because you may not always be able to see people. So that listen actively, checking in, engaging all the participants, helping people feel, again, the same thing as any meeting, helping people feel welcome, comfortable asking questions in chat or any other way. Part of your role as the facilitator is making that a comfortable space, sometimes to have difficult conversations. Summarizing, paraphrasing, synthesizing. Here are some things that I hear, testing some ideas. These are all roles for a meeting facilitator to plan as you're moving through the conversation. And these are some typical meeting functions and tools you might want to use. We've talked a number of times when doing brainstorming using the whiteboard or chat, or other tools that we showed in there. For decision making, using the polls where you can put various options and letting people choose, or voting or raising hands, or the 1 to 5 consensus that we showed earlier today. For problem solving, you can use the screen share, breakout rooms. All those are ways to use some of the tools during the meeting to make that meeting productive. And of course, finally, finishing the meeting, having a record, distributing minutes. It's critical to do action minutes, not lengthy minutes about who said what, but action minutes about these were the decisions that we made, these were the assignments that were given, and distribute those relatively soon after the meetings. I can't tell you how many meetings I've sat at where minutes were not taken, and we have the same meeting over and over again because nobody can remember what was decided. So taking time to do that. Advantage of Zoom and others, as you can record it and share it so everybody sees what was discussed in the meeting. Great way for transparency with your team. And then of course, as the leader, is checking in with each of the owners to make sure they're following up on their responsibilities soon after the meeting. And a few other hints, Angela?
I'm just reading some of the things in chat. Some people have asked about the use of technology, like professional lighting. And my response to that was the more access people can have, like if it's just a team meeting, to try to complicate it with professional lighting might deter people from wanting to participate. Whereas if it's a board of supervisors meeting or a planning commission meeting, then having proper lighting for those folks, especially as we start to engage when some of them are in person, physically distanced, that might be necessary and helpful. Liz went ahead and reattached the documents from the PowerPoint so that you can see the, somebody was asking for the table graphic. Again, if you contact us, we can send you the PowerPoint slide. We just made a PowerPoint slide. It wasn't anything fancy. Let's see, was there anything else we wanted to talk about here? Was there something else you wanted from me, Bill, on that?
No, just these are hints. And you see lots of hints in the chat from people who are experienced with this. Keep all these in mind because a virtual meeting doesn't just happen, just like an in-person meeting. But I think we would argue that a virtual meeting takes even a little bit more preparation time than an in-person meeting. And building the norms that, another one we didn't mention is start your meeting on time. Both for in-person and virtual ones, because if you started 5 minutes late, then people start arriving 5 minutes late, and then you start at 10 minutes late, and then you start at 15 minutes late, because you're creating these norms that people realize, okay, they're not going to start right away, so no point in joining. And some of these other things that we've already talked many times about. What we'd like you to do is, based on what you've heard today, there's some things that you're going to start doing or stop doing or continue doing. Type some of your ideas in chat. We'd be really curious.
Great. Annotation tool, delegating roles, set aside the real estate. That's cool. The whiteboard. Great. The checklist. One of the things that I also have encountered is some of the folks who've been working in counties for many years, depending on their agility with this is a great opportunity to help train about effective meetings to some of your millennials and Gen Xers who are comfortable with the technology, and yet they don't necessarily have the experience in meeting facilitation that you do. So this is a beautiful cross-generational partnership opportunity for there to be that pollination across the backgrounds and the capacities. There was another question. I think we're probably good. We can talk about that offline. So using the checklist, great. And make the checklist your own. I actually used that checklist as a means to do an evaluation of a meeting like this. It was like we sent out ahead of time what the goals and the agenda were, we shared the timing, and we helped people use the tools, and then I asked them to rate the meeting. And on that checklist, you can just have them put a check mark, or you can change it if you want. But with 20 points, I just want to know what they thought was done well. And then if there are gaps across the various elements, then I can make sure that I look to include those things in my future meetings.
You know, that's a good idea to add that 5 minutes at the end of your meeting to do a quick review of how do people feel about that meeting, how they feel about the experience of the meeting, get feedback from your group. I think in the era we're in today, it's also a good idea to spend a couple minutes at the beginning of the meeting for people to check in on how they're feeling, because this is such a roller coaster we're going through that human interaction is important. And I would recommend that you consider adding a couple minutes at the beginning just for people to talk about how they're doing today, because every day is an experience in the environment we're in today. So speaking of evaluation, we'd like this poll. And so Liz, if you could open the poll, how do you feel now about facilitating your next meeting? Nobody is at a 1. So Angela, it looks like people are feeling much better about facilitating that next virtual meeting.
That's great. I think we had 40-something people last time, but with 38 responding now, it looks like we moved people up at least 1. So right on.
And we've included some other resources for you to check out, some of these links, some of these articles. And as I mentioned, there's some additional material at the end of your handouts on details about using some of the tools in Zoom. I'll also say that Zoom and all the other platforms have great video tutorials online too. So if you're going to be using Zoom or whichever one you're going to use, just go to the home site, and I think you'll find a lot of videos that walk you through step by step how to use these different tools and remind you of how to use the tools and other techniques. Because meetings are important. They're, as we've been talking about throughout our conversation today, they use a lot of time. And they're also this opportunity, though, to bring together expertise and experience from across your department, across your program, across the county, to solve very difficult problems and challenges and address things and use the creativity and innovation of the group. So the meetings are important to be having, and having people engaged and keeping them engaged and involved. We hope that some of the techniques and ideas, both in the tools and in facilitating and using the technology, will help you better achieve the purpose that you're holding the meeting, and better use and better engage your employees and your community in solving problems. We've enjoyed, Angela, I've enjoyed spending time with you today. We have a couple minutes left for any questions. Otherwise, thank you on behalf of both of us and all of us at CSAC Institute for everything you're doing for the people of your counties. We are the safety nets. You are the safety nets for everybody in California. And regardless of what you do, we want you to know how much all of us appreciate the work that you do for the people of California. There's always the option to go to the host of your platform, and they'll have tutorials on how to do all these.
Why don't you vote? You can tell us yes or no. Do you have any more questions? And that actually reminds me, if you weren't able to see our screen today and you were calling in, take the opportunity to connect with somebody who you can practice these things with. And all of the slides that we were discussing, you've been provided in your handout. So you have everything when you get back to your computer.
And this will be on posted at the CSAC Institute website. Ovia put in a link to that. All three of the webinars we've done are being posted there, along with the transcripts from the chat from those webinars. You'll also find a number of tip sheets on leadership in a crisis and other materials that we've posted specifically for how to exercise leadership in challenging and difficult times. So please take advantage of those. Feel free to print them out and share them with your team. Use them as a discussion point. That's what they're there for. They're there for you to use, and we hope you find them valuable. And with that, if there's no other questions, thank you. Stay well, stay healthy, and we look forward to seeing you at another webinar, and starting in September, back in an Institute class. Even though they'll be online, we will be resuming our Institute classes in September. Watch your email for details on registration, which classes are there. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.
Bye, everybody.